Let's take our first look at Adobe Dimension. Adobe Dimension is really good for making mock-ups and case studies for presentations. It allows you to combine 3D models, lighting, textures, surfaces, and images and graphics. Let's create a new document. Okay, so we can see here our workspace with our canvas in the center there. You can see our first canvas is 1024 by 768 pixels wide. We've got some tool palettes over the left, some properties over the right, some navigation up the top there. We can see our properties panel is important here. This is contextual, so currently it's the properties for the canvas itself, but once we start getting objects in the scene there, we can use this properties panel to change different variables depending on what we have selected. Let's change the size of our canvas to something else. And maybe we'll work towards making something for Instagram. So we're going to make a square scene there or canvas. Some shortcuts that are common across Adobe, Command plus and minus to move forward and backward or in and out of your work there. The spacebar allows you to move around the scene. You can also change your view zoom at the top here. I'm going to save this file. Just to the desktop. Okay, let's look around at some other things. Right on the left-hand side, we've got a tool palette here. Our selection tools and our camera tools, which will be useful in a second. And then down at the bottom, we've got some more navigation options. Next to our tool palette is this media library, which is pretty good. These are our starter assets. You can also toggle between your library if you have any appropriate assets that could go in Adobe Dimension. So there's different types of assets that we can use in Adobe Dimension. Firstly, we've got 3D models, and there's a great selection of 3D models that we can work with. Underneath there, we have Adobe standard materials, and these are kind of skin elements, surfaces, and textures that we can use. There's a different type of surfaces and textures called substance materials that we'll look at further down the track. We can change the different lighting in our scene. We can also add images to our scenes for backgrounds and also as surface elements. So we can toggle through all of those different types of assets using those little shortcuts there. Let's get something in our scene, and I'm just going to randomly add in, what should I add? This square bottle, and I've just dragged that and dropped it on the scene. You can see there it's appeared in our scene. It has this widget around there that we'll have a look at in a second. You can see these different colors, and it will kind of highlight as you hover over those things. Let's click off that. When I've clicked on the background there, that widget's disappeared. I want to look at moving the camera around first. You can see this is the center of our scene, and actually I might just delete that. I've selected it using the selection tool, hit delete on the canvas. Grab another tool, and I'm going to put it a bit closer. See that blue square? That's indicating where the model is going to land when I let go. And that's a bit of a better position. Okay, so as well as moving around objects in a scene, we can actually frame the camera in different ways, and we have some tools to help us do that. Firstly, we have the Orbit tool. If I click on the Orbit tool and click and drag on the scene, you can see that my camera moves around, and the Orbit tool is probably going to be the most, well, it is a useful tool for framing your objects. So I'm just clicking and holding and dragging around with the Orbit tool there. Another tool that we can use is the Pan tool. And the Pan tool, allows us to move the camera left and right, like so, sort of up and down, left and right. Finally, we've got the Dolly tool, which allows us to go closer and further away from our object. Alright, so they're the three main camera tools, or tools that allow you to move your camera around in that space. The Orbit, the Pan, Orbit, Pan, and Dolly tools. Alright, let's actually build up a composition. In this space here. So I plan to put together a mock-up that displays a logo that I've recently created. The client is a donut shop, so I'm going to put together a collection of objects from my starter assets here that are appropriate for that kind of logo, and I'm going to add my logo to those objects. It's going to show off how my logo might look in a particular situation. So I'm going to start with a coffee cup. I'm going to drag my coffee cup into the scene. Alright, so there's my coffee cup. So we moved the camera around before using the Pan, Dolly, and Orbit tools, but we can also move our objects around in space. And I pointed out this widget here before, and we use this widget to move our objects around, to rotate them, move them on the X, Y, and Z axes. You can see I've clicked off that object there. When I click onto that object, you can see our properties for that object. Up in the top here, I didn't point this out before, this is our scene inspector, and the scene inspector gives us a kind of a rundown of all the objects that are inside our environment. So we've got a camera, we've got one object currently, which is a coffee cup that has a cup element and a lid element that are separate. And then below here are the properties of the coffee cup, where exactly it's sitting in Z space. I can actually change the, I said Z space there, I meant X, Y, and Z space. I can numerically change the position of each of these elements. And also I can change the rotation. You can see I'm rotating. So I'm just clicking and dragging in that, click and drag that number, and it will rotate or move depending on the figures that I add in there. I'll just undo that. And also change how big our object is there. So I just change the X. I'm going to lock that. And now when I change those figures, my object gets bigger or smaller. Okay, but I can also move the object around using the widget. You can see there's a green, red, and blue widget there, element to the widget. And each of those has a different axis that it's working with or assigned to. So if I grab this little cone on the end of the red one, I can move and click and drag, I can move the object around on the x-axis. If I grab the green one, I can move the object around on the y, up and down. Better get this video finished before I run out of batteries. I can also rotate and scale. So if I grab the little square there, I'm going to change the scale on the y-axis, and same on the red. Now if I grab the little circles there on the widget, I can rotate. So I grab the blue one and I can rotate my object that way. So that's our object widget that allows us to move our object around in X, Y, and Z space. Okay, so let's add another object. I want to use the little carry bag. I reckon that'd probably be a good, well, you'd use one of those in a donut shop. Okay, so now I've got some compositional problems that I want to address. So I'm going to use my camera tools to maybe just arrange my composition a little bit differently. Zoom out a little bit. Pan around, change the orbit a bit. Something like that. And I want to arrange these two objects together a bit differently. So I'm going to grab the move tool, move my little bag a bit closer, rotate it a little bit, bring it a bit closer to my object like so. So that's looking pretty good. You can see that bag is quite detailed. I've even got the kind of internal little seams and so forth. Some great models that come with the starter assets. And by the way, you can get more assets from Adobe stock or other marketplaces, and you can import a whole range of different 3D files if you want particular objects in your mockups. We can also adjust the surfaces of each of our objects. And for this demonstration, I'm just using some pretty simple surfaces. I'm using, they're going to be white objects. White is going to go well with my logo, the look of my logo. And we're going to actually add the logo to these objects here. So to start with, I'm going to change from this sort of drab grey to a nice crisp white. And I'm going to go up to, in my scene editor here, I'm going to go to the bag element here, bag with wire handles, and I'm going to double click on that. And you can see that I've gone into that object here, and now I can adjust some of the properties of that model itself. And I'm going to change just one element in here, and that's going to be the base color. I'm going to change that from grey to a nice crisp white. And I'm going to go back out and I'm I'm going to do the same to the coffee cup. So you see the coffee cup is actually made out of two elements there. And I'm going to change the cup material to white. I'm going to change the lid, just double clicking on that, the lid base color to something that's going to work with my logo, this kind of pink color. Maybe we'll see how that goes. Alright, so I've changed the cup lid to a pink. I've changed both of the surface colors to white. Let's add my logo to these objects now, and I'm going to just jump over to Photoshop, Illustrator, and I'm going to open up the artwork that I've made for my client. And my client's called Forbidden Donuts. You can see I've made for my client a logo for them to use, and also this pattern that they can use in other areas of their business. Could be packaging items, could be like decals in their shop, etc. Now, you can actually bring Illustrator files directly into Adobe Dimension, although I've had some problems doing that. And the best way that I have found is to export your work to a JPEG or a PNG. I'm just going to go to JPEG, save that to the desktop. I'm going to export just the one artboard, and I'm going to export it as a RGB image at a high resolution or a print resolution, print ready resolution. And I'm going to click OK. And then back over in Dimensions, I can drag things directly into the scene. So I'm just going to bring up a Finder window. And you can see there's my JPEG that I exported. I'm going to drag that and drop it right onto my coffee cup. And look at that, sort of positioned it quite well, nice and centrally. And I can grab that and I can drag that to wherever I need. You can see there's this kind of handle here where I can rotate. I'll just tidy that up a little bit. I can also change the scale by altering those little toggles, and I can also adjust various properties in the properties panel. I'm going to go back and grab another version of that, pop it on my bag. Awesome. Reposition that. Looks alright. Just scale it up a little bit. I'm just holding Shift down to make sure that that's scaling evenly. So that's looking quite good. I could make some adjustments to the kind of positioning of these objects here. Like so. Now up here there is this button called render preview. So we need to actually render our scenes to see what they'll finally look like. So you can see that in the kind of preview here, we've got some kind of rough elements. It's drawing things a little without as much detail. Sorry, just ran out of battery there. Had to restart. I think I was talking about rendering. Yeah, so when you're working, Dimension doesn't render everything perfectly. Kind of simplifies things so that your computer can run effectively, but we do have this option here to render preview, which will kind of run through the scene and kind of give you an indication of how the kind of light is falling and where kind of shadows, where kind of shadows are hitting and where kind of specular highlights are. So that's a good kind of quick preview to check out your workspace, because you can see here that kind of shadows are fairly kind of rudimentary while you're working. Let's add another asset to the scene. I'm going to add an image, and there are a bunch of images kind of built in. Of course, you can add your own. I'm going to add this table image, and I'm going to drag it right into the scene. And you can see there that it's kind of positioned it in the scene. Now, things are looking a little bit weird. Objects and the background aren't matching up. There is this pretty interesting match image button here, and let's click that and see what happens. Hopefully that allows us to, Dimension analyzes all of the objects in the scene and attempts to resize everything and create appropriate light and also match perspective, interestingly enough. Let's click it OK and see how we go. Oh, well, I actually didn't really want it to adjust the size of the scene, but I clicked that accidentally. But you can see how effectively it has kind of matched, analyzed the background and matched the camera angle and also the lighting to the background there. So that's pretty kind of good. And I might actually just leave it as it is because I quite like the composition. But I might just make some final adjustments to kind of the positioning of my objects in that space there. I'll rotate my bag around a little bit. And I think I want to move my cup across a bit and bring it around. Maybe I think I want that in front a bit more. Kind of like that. I reckon that's looking pretty good myself. Just a little bit more of that logo. Super good. Okay, so there's my my mock-up completed. Combined models, 3D models, the logo that I've made in Illustrator, and also a background element there. Now we'll want to export this image out of Dimension so that we can put it in our portfolio or present it to our client or whatever. We'll do that under the Render tab over here. So let's go over to the Render tab. All right, and I'm going to render it locally. There is some cloud-based rendering that you can do where it renders it inside your Adobe Creative Cloud account. I'm going to export it to just a working file. That'll be good as a high quality render. And I'm going to export a PSD. I'll save that to the desktop. and I'm going to click OK. And it will take, depending on how quick your computer is, a little bit of time to export this file, to render this file to a PSD. You can see it's starting the process there of working through all of the coordinates and redrawing those pixels for our final rendered file. So the render's finished, and it took about 7 or 8 minutes on my MacBook Pro to output that file. I'm just going to minimize my apps and go to the desktop, and you can see that we've output a PSD file there. Let's open that up. Here's our file in Photoshop, and you can see that we've got quite a few layers over in the layers palette here, which makes this output quite versatile. We can do some further editing in Photoshop. You can see that the actual objects and their shadows are separate from the background itself, so we can continue to refine and make changes as we see fit. So anyway, I hope that was a good introduction to Adobe Dimension and how we could use it to create mock-ups and presentation elements of our work.